There's one more thing I have to tell you. We can't change the world by just getting proximate, just changing narratives and just staying hopeful. The fourth thing we have to do, and this is the hard one, is that we have to do uncomfortable things. Because you do not create justice by only doing what's comfortable and convenient. I've looked, I've studied, I've researched, I've never seen an end to oppression, an end to poverty, an end to abuse, an end to suffering when people only do what's comfortable and convenient. To change the world, to create justice, we have to do uncomfortable things. And that's hard. But I actually believe that we are in a room full of people who know what it means to do uncomfortable things. You cannot create the kind of dazzling things that you've created. You cannot innovate without putting yourselves in uncomfortable situations. You all take risks. You all do difficult things, and you accept that you will not succeed until you do the uncomfortable. And that is why I believe that it is us in this room who are capable of getting proximate, changing narratives and doing hopeful things, and yes, doing uncomfortable things that will ultimately be necessary to change the world. I'll end with this. There is a different metric system for those of us who are trying to change the world, and I just hope you'll think about it. If you're trying to change the world, you can't measure how you're doing by how much money you make, by how many people applaud you, by how many people think what you're doing is great. You're going to get a lot more people who think what you're doing is not so great if you try to intervene on behalf of the abused and the suffering. But there's a different metric system. It was taught to me by an older man. I was in a church, and this older man came into the church, and he was sitting in a wheelchair. I was giving a talk, and he kept staring at me the whole time I was giving my talk. And he had this very stern, almost angry look on his face. And he was distracting me because he was looking at me so intensely. But I got through my talk, and people came up at the end of the talk. They were very nice, but that man kept sitting in the back staring at me. And finally, when everybody else left, he got a little boy to wheel him up the middle aisle of the church to come and talk to me. And this man came up the middle aisle of that church, and he had that very stern look, almost angry look on his face, and he came up the middle aisle, and then he got in front of me, and he put his hand up, and he said, "Do you know what you're doing?" And I didn't know how to respond. I just stood there. He said, "Do you know what you're doing?" And I stepped back, and I mumbled something. I don't even remember what I said. And then he asked me one last time. He said, "Do you know what you're doing?" And then this man looked at me. He says, "I'm going to tell you what you're doing." This man looked at me, he says, "You're beating the drum for justice. You keep beating the drum for justice." And I was so moved. I was also really relieved because I just didn't know what he was going to do. Then he grabbed me by the jacket, he pulled me into the wheelchair, he said, "Come here, come here, come here, I'm going to show you something." And this older man looked up at me and he turned his head. He said, "You see this scar I have behind my right ear?" He says, "I got that scar in Greene County, Alabama, in 1963, trying to register people to vote." He turned his head and he said, "You see this cut down here at the bottom of my neck?" He said, "I got that cut in Philadelphia, Mississippi, 1964, trying to register people to vote." He turned his head. He said, "You see this dark spot?" He said, "That's my bruise. I got my bruise in Birmingham, Alabama, 1965, trying to register people to vote." And then he looked at me. He said, "I'm going to tell you something, young man." He said, "People look at me. They think I'm some old man sitting in a wheelchair covered with cuts and bruises and scars." He said, "But I'm going to tell you something." He said, "These aren't my cuts. These aren't my bruises. These aren't my scars." He said, "These are my medals of honor." It is the uncomfortable things we do in service of justice that I think ultimately honor us as a human race, as a community of people who are committed to changing the world.